I'm Crosby Kemper, the director of the Kansas City Public Library. We're very grateful to the Missouri Library Association for holding this event here tonight at the Kansas City Public Library, and for the chance for all of us to hear Molly Raphael, the president of the American Library Association. Molly, who, as our leader in the library world and leader of great libraries over the last dozen years or so, it certainly represents the best thinking and the best direction of libraries in our time. As many of you know, Molly has been the director of the Washington, D.C. Library with its incredible challenges and did a great job there, and became the director of Multnomah, the Portland, Oregon Library, which many people think is the best library in the country. I might be one of those. Molly, during Molly's tenure there, the Multnomah Library won the IMLS's gold medal. Two Kansas City libraries, which will remain nameless, have also won the IMLS gold medal, which is perhaps the highest honor in the library business. She's been a great director. She's been a great leader of librarians in all the work that she's done over the years in various aspects at the ALA and elsewhere. A leader in looking at technology, libraries and technology. A leader in diversity. She's concentrated in various areas such as helping the deaf in libraries over the years. That's been important. But libraries as community spaces has been a particular focus of hers. She's created great spaces wherever she's gone. So it's a great pleasure to have her here. So won't you please welcome our leader, Molly Raphael.
So I thought Crosby was actually going to tell the story about how he kidnapped me yesterday. Picked me up at the airport, and we got talking, and we just kept talking, and the next thing I knew, we were looking at the Kansas City skyline, and he said to me, "What hotel are you staying at?" And I said, "The Holiday Inn at the airport." So anyway, we had a delightful conversation and a delightful trip, and both felt that it was fortunate in a way that he thought I was staying downtown because we had some wonderful opportunity to talk. So I want to thank you all for coming this evening. I'm a little overwhelmed by the size of the audience, so I'll try to spin your way. I have a cheek mic on. It's the first time I've ever had a cheek mic, so it seems to be working. But I want to thank the Missouri Library Association for inviting me to come to this conference and to speak. It's one of the great joys, I think, of being president of the American Library Association, is to get out to chapter conferences and to meet people in the community and in the library world in different states. I certainly won't get to all 50 state conferences, but I will get to a fair number. And they're all different and they're all the same, if you understand what I'm talking about. And it's absolutely wonderful to be giving this talk in such a spectacular central library. The renaissance of central libraries in this country is remarkable. And if you travel around the country and go to different cities and don't think about it, you will stumble across central libraries that have transformed downtowns by their being built there, and have drawn, Seattle draws international attention. It shows up in car advertisements and other things. So central libraries have really had a great comeback, which may not seem likely in the climate that we're in, but I'm losing this. But it is okay. It's dramatic, and I love seeing this building. I read about it when it was first planned and talked about, and now it's wonderful to actually be here. And if you haven't gone down to see the vault, on the vault level, you should do that before you leave. I actually became interested in Kansas City as a place in 1979 when I first read this line in a book. "The best restaurants in the world are, of course, in Kansas City." Not all of them, only the top 4 or 5. I'm assuming there are a lot of you in the audience that recognize that from Calvin Trillin's American Fried. I read that, and as a traveler, someone who had lived in the East, lived in Washington, D.C., traveled to New York many times, eaten in restaurants there, had actually, when I read it, traveled to Paris a couple times and been to many other places of haute cuisine. Trillin's opening line was a kind of a shocker to me, but it also intrigued me. So 2 years later, as my husband set off to drive across the country to meet me at the end of the ALA conference in San Francisco, his goal was to arrive in Kansas City as fast as he could. In less than 24 hours, he made 2 trips to Arthur Bryant's and 1 to Sneed's. And in fact, his description of driving to Sneed's was he kept driving and driving and driving. He didn't think he'd actually get there. And I actually brought with me the hat to prove that he's been to Sneed's. This is a well-worn hat. And actually, if I didn't have to travel with only 3-ounce bottles of things because I didn't have any checked luggage, I would have brought you some of the original Arthur Bryant's BBQ sauce that my husband bought at that time, 2 gallons of it. And lest you worry, we still have some. And that 30-year-old sauce you think might have spoiled, but I can assure you nothing could live in that sauce. It is so hot, I can't eat it, but we offer it to guests. We actually got invited to someone's house who knew that we had it, and he said, I'll barbecue if you bring some Arthur Bryant sauce. So we did. So if you're in the Portland area, look me up, and we'll be happy to have you sample some of it. Now onto the topic of the evening. I titled my talk, Libraries Essential for Learning, Essential for Life. And I did that because of my deep belief in the value of libraries of all types and the essential and transformative role that libraries can and must play in the lives of individuals and communities. We are living in quite extraordinary times. Throughout the library world, reductions in our financial resources have threatened our survival. At the same time, many libraries are experiencing large increases in demand and use. In academic, public, school, and special libraries, these challenges really call for innovative thinking and forward-looking solutions. You know, in the 1990s, when the internet really started to take off, many pundits who really didn't understand the core of what libraries do suggested that libraries were just going to fade away. Libraries, they believed, were simply storehouses of books and other resources that would be made obsolete by the internet. But instead of just fading away, we embraced the internet. Libraries demonstrated once again how adaptable we could be in meeting the needs of the communities we served. Now we find ourselves in an environment where if we don't change, if we like the way we are and just decide to stay there, we will find ourselves sitting on the roadside and watching the world pass by. I believed in the 1990s, and I'm even more convinced today, that the best way for us to ensure the future of all types of libraries is to demonstrate unequivocally that libraries are essential as any of the services that we hear described that way by decision makers and elected officials. As a public librarian for 40 years, I grew somewhat weary of hearing certain local services, primarily police and fire, described as essential, while libraries and other services were described as discretionary. When I talk to my colleagues serving in K-12 schools, they tell me that the word their administrators use is ancillary. No matter what the name, the meaning is clear. We just aren't as important as some other parts of our community. I strongly disagree with this assessment, no matter what the library, but I do agree that we haven't been as effective in making our case as we need to be. In order not just to survive, But to thrive, we really must not only transform our libraries, but we must also transform how people see us. How can we shift that thinking so that rather than being seen as nice to have, we're seen as essential? First, I think we who work in libraries and lead libraries need to listen to the people in our communities. Our services must reflect what the communities value and how we can contribute to our community's advancement. And we need to be willing to take bold steps to make difficult choices about what we can do and what we cannot do. Second, I think we need to build on the studies and research that demonstrate the value of libraries, all types of libraries. And third, we need to rally our communities, our library users, many of you who are here this evening, to tell our story, the story of the transformative power of libraries. So first, how do we keep our libraries moving forward? The rapidly changing world in which we are living in challenges us to keep up, not just to stay where we are comfortable and safe, but to look for opportunities to deliver services in new ways. You know, when I think about the changes that are happening around in library communities, we often focus on the technology and e-books and the different ways that we're getting information. But there's also all of the ways we're delivering things to people and all the way that we communicate with people. Our total way of communicating with our library users or customers has been transformed by the technology. But I also think we need to take a look at how dramatically many of our communities are changing demographically. And this has always been a challenge, I think, for libraries because they build buildings in places and stock those libraries with resources, and then the community changes totally around them, and they're in the wrong place, and now they have very few children who live in the community, yet they have this great space that was built for children. So the changes and the challenges that libraries have now and communities have with their libraries are dramatic on many dimensions. When I visit the website of a library like this one, or many other ones that are in the area, I see friends in the audience who run library systems in the area as well. And I know the challenges that each of them is going through and struggling with. And I also get uplifted by coming to a space like this and seeing how the library has really been able to transform historic places, an historic place in this community, and turn it into a functional, inspiring space in which to be. I actually think this is a very exciting time to be working in libraries as we try to balance the demand for traditional library services as well as the increasing demand for digital services. By paying attention and listening to our diverse communities, we can make decisions that bring in new patrons as well as serve those who have valued and supported us for years. There was a recent policy brief published by the American Library Association's Office for Information Technology Policy, OITP for short, entitled Confronting the Future, Strategic Visions for the 21st Century Public Library. It's authored by OITP fellow Roger E. Levine, and it lays out 4 dimensions of the strategic decisions that are facing libraries. If you can think of these dimensions as really being on a continuum and then sort of think about them in relation to the libraries that you know. So the first one is the physical at one end, the physical library versus the virtual library. And there really aren't many, if any, libraries who are totally at one end or the other. But where libraries decide to move themselves and where they're planning to be a year or 2 years or 5 years from now on that continuum, those are very important strategic decisions. And if they aren't made with thinking a whole lot about the community and what's the world out there and how's it going to change, you could end up in that library that was built in the wrong place and the whole community's moved away from it again. So that's one of the really important areas and certainly has a huge connection to what we do with our financial resources in libraries. If they were unlimited, it wouldn't be so difficult, but they aren't in any library that I know. So the second dimension that Levine identifies is the way we look at users. Do we look at the individual user, or do we look at the community that we're serving? So again, if you think of that as a continuum, in this area, I don't think any libraries are at the absolute extremes, but I think some libraries do focus more on individual users and some focus more on community. I think of, for instance, the kind of programming that Kansas City Public Library has become very well known for, and I've seen in the kinds of programs that they have scheduled here and that Crosby talked about. This is one that clearly connects to community. Yes, individuals come to it, but it is something that serves community. But we make choices about how we create physical spaces, what we offer, what kinds of equipment do we buy? Do we buy equipment that allows for collaboration in a larger community group? Do we have meeting room spaces? All those kinds of questions. The third dimension that Levine identifies is the idea of collection, and think of that as both e-collections as well as print collections versus the creative library. And the creative library is something that the concept has really taken off in a lot of countries outside the United States. It's taking off some in the United States as well, but it's the idea that the library provides this place for creativity in the community so that it attracts authors and musicians and performers and editors who do collaborative work and do creative work within the library. And the fourth dimension is really the library as portal or the archival library. Again, most libraries are someplace in the middle on the continuum, but how much does the library own versus how much does it provide access to? Most public libraries, as they move more and more into the virtual and portal space, still maintain some of the archival functions, particularly in the area of special collections, local history, those things that can't be found anyplace else and couldn't be provided on that portal. So the second area that I talked about that I think we need to pay attention to is in the area of research and on the value of libraries. This is something where there's quite a bit of research going on, often in universities, often in library schools and universities, but it's going on in many other places that would be useful for libraries to pay attention to. Some examples that have been widely circulated of the kinds of research that I'm talking about is a few years ago, the Knight Commission came out with a report entitled Informing Communities, Sustaining Democracy in the Digital Age, which really articulates a vision of the community information needs and critical steps necessary to meet them. The report offers some very clear places where libraries can contribute to that vision of informed communities. Another example is the OCLC report, which is From Awareness to Funding, which came out a few years ago, which really looked at what actually affected voters' willingness to support public library funding initiatives. Some of the key findings were surprises to some people. For instance, one of them was that library funding support is only marginally related to library visitations. This assumption that we should just talk to the people who are really using the library because they're the ones who would support us, when in fact there are many, many people in the community who are deep believers in the value and the importance of public libraries in the community, but they don't actually come in and use the library that much. Another is the perceptions of libraries are an important predictor of library funding. A few years ago, when I was working at the Multnomah County Library, we had to go out to have a renewal of our library levy. And our levy produced about 2/3 of our budget. So if it didn't get renewed, we were going to be in big trouble. We hired somebody to do a little surveying to find out what things were the important issues that we should focus on. But one of the things that came out of that survey was how trusted librarians were in the community as honest brokers, trustworthy and respected. And As a result, during that levy campaign, anytime I was out working on it, I always introduced myself as the chief librarian of the Multnomah County Library, because that I am a librarian and I do librarian things, but that was something that we knew was really important in the community. So a third finding of the OCLC report was voters who see the library as a transformational force as opposed to an informational force are much more likely to support increases in taxes for its support. So being able to use that kind of research when we talk about and figure out what we were doing when we go out into the community. I want to give an example also for academic libraries, for example, because there are many, even though we are in a public library, we are really in a library ecosystem in our communities, and all types of libraries contribute to the success of library services in the community. An important review of the research in academic libraries was put out I guess it was about a year ago, by ALA's Association of College and Research Libraries, that looked at the value of academic libraries and did a comprehensive review on the research and what actually is being done and is out there as a sort of a first step. And they've just received a grant to actually now go out and do some testing and gather some more information. This is an important first step. If you want to be able to talk about academic libraries in a way that is persuasive to people who are making decisions about the future of your academic libraries, then it makes a whole lot of sense to figure out what value do they actually contribute to college or university education. In school libraries, an example of the kind of research that I'm talking about has been done by Keith Curry Lance from Colorado. I don't know if any of you school librarians out there, I would assume you know of him. He's been doing a lot of work on the impact of school libraries and school librarians on student performance, and actually done studies in individual states, including one in my own state of Oregon. What much of this research is doing is actually looking at the outcomes libraries produce. For many years in the library world, at least when I started, it was all about inputs. How many books did we have per capita, for example? Then we started collecting data about outputs, and we're still doing a lot of that. How many books did we actually circulate? Now we are finally paying attention to what people really care about. What is the impact of what we're doing in the community, whatever the library community? How do we really transform lives? What's the effect, for instance, of a summer reading program on children's reading level in the community? How does an academic library actually contribute to student learning or attracting research funding to the university? What is the impact of information literacy instruction in school libraries on student achievement? Outcome data are much more difficult to collect, but they have a much greater impact on decision makers. As practitioners, I think we can be more effective in our advocacy work if we can use these research results when we make the case for the value of libraries. When we couple this research with the economic threats to libraries and the way that people have fought back to save their libraries all over the country, it becomes clear that I think we have a golden opportunity to demonstrate now and in the near future the critical role libraries play in learning and throughout life. And now I want to turn to my third point, and this is especially directed at the members of the general public who are here, as well as for librarians and library staff and library supporters to take back to their libraries. My third point is the area that my ALA Presidential Advocacy Initiative is focused on, which is who can be most effective in telling the library story. When we who work in libraries tell our story, what really is the library's story, there is almost always a perceived element of self-interest. People who think libraries are not important can simply say that we are trying to protect our jobs. Well, I don't believe this is the motivation. There may be an element of truth to it. But that still is the perception, and it's an easy argument for people to push back on us. When members of our community tell the story of the transformational power of libraries, that self-interest issue just totally disappears. As a public librarian, and I'm sure many of you will share this experience, I frequently witness the power of people from our community telling our story. I often would meet with elected officials and other community leaders to talk about our programs and their value. In tough economic times, I knew that they struggled with how best to make decisions, including those officials who I knew valued library services. What I saw time and again was the profound impact of a parent or a teacher or a business leader or a community activist who could make the case for us. For example, when I saw the father of a third grader who told the story about his son, who had been a reluctant reader and had fallen behind in grade level in reading in school, and he talked about what the summer reading program in our library had done and turned his son around. His son now loved reading and was doing very well in school. The aha experience that I saw the council member that I had just talked to about the summer reading program was dramatic. The reaction was, what I had said didn't do anything. What this father had said had made a huge difference. That power of that other person telling the story has been known to us for a while, particularly, I think, in the public library world, as we often have to justify and defend our budgets before elected officials. In the OCLC report from Awareness to Funding that I mentioned earlier, it noted that when libraries were seen as transformational forces rather than informational sources, that they received much stronger support. As librarians, I think we can help people in our communities find the words that describe that transformational experience, the outcomes that really make a difference in people's lives. I've been heartened by similar situations in other types of libraries. In school libraries, the most widely celebrated incident was in Spokane, Washington, where a bunch of 3 mothers, who became known as the Spokane Moms, spoke out and made a real difference about their libraries. Even when they lost a vote at the local level, they decided to go fight for legislation at the state level. They thought it was important for students all across the state to have equal access to library services in their schools. Their persistence was pretty amazing, and in the end, it paid off at the state level by providing state support for school libraries. Keith Curry Lance summed up the impact this way, quote, 5 minutes of parent advocacy for school libraries can have more effect than 5 years of what might be perceived as self-serving advocacy. Well, there have been some efforts to replicate this advocacy effort. We still don't seem to be lighting fires all across the country to really make this happen. The recent report on the value of academic libraries that I mentioned provides some ideas about ways we might talk about contributions of academic libraries. A story that caught my eye last year was when I read about the sit-in at the University of California at Berkeley, where several hundred students took over the anthropology library for 24 hours to protest the cut in hours to the library. As one who came of age in the 1960s and participated in nonviolent protests, I remember how powerful mass demonstrations can be. The students, a constituency of library users, not the library employees, were saying to funders that libraries really do matter. So my challenge to you this evening is to think about how our communities can speak in powerful ways about libraries. How can we find ways to direct this kind of advocacy, if you will, by library users to say that libraries make a difference to the people who are making decisions about the future of libraries, including funding decisions? As a profession, I also think we have another important consideration that we need to confront about how we advocate for our libraries. We seem to only do it when we're being cut and times are tough. We need to find ways to have our communities talk about the value of libraries year in and year out, not just in tough economic times. This is not saying that our community should be talking about budgets and money, but it is saying that we need to have people talk about libraries and student achievement, or about summer reading programs and the way they result in children and youth maintaining their reading levels over the long summer break, or how student access to higher education as an outcome has a direct link to how student success in higher education has an outcome as a direct link to academic libraries. I haven't said much about special libraries, but there was an unfortunate example of this in the 1980s that I witnessed in Washington, D.C., which was when there was a big push to contract out many of the government libraries in Washington, D.C., or eliminate them entirely. It was a very difficult time, but the libraries that had people in those agencies who actually spoke out and fought for their continuance and the services to continue in those libraries run by the people who had been running them, those were the ones that had the easiest time dealing with that whole effort to contract out all those libraries. So if we can move our libraries into this essential service category that I'm talking about, like police and fire, then we really start in a different place when we get to tough economic times. We still have to work really hard, but we are standing in a very different and much better place than if we have to start from where we often start, which is fighting from proposed major cuts. So how do we connect this research, this important research that is being done on the value of libraries and their transformational power, with community advocates who can speak more powerfully and effectively about our libraries than we can? I don't think we have all the answers now. I think we're still learning a lot about this, but I think we're asking the right questions, and I believe that we are a group of smart, committed professionals. We are a very generous profession as well. We really believe in sharing and replicating successes, and we see this in the way libraries replicate successful new services that other libraries have started. We have many library supporters already who are passionate about the value of libraries, so I think we can figure out how to marry these different elements that we're talking about. And I also think that the American Library Association can play a very important role in supporting libraries out in the community. It has to happen at the local level, but I think the American Library Association can provide support for people working out in libraries about how to go out into the communities and talk to people in the communities and gather that information, gather that research. I think we can help provide the tools. We really need to find ways to be much more collaborative than we have been in the past. These are really core issues to our profession, and I believe to the future of libraries and librarians. My advocacy initiative, Empowering Voices, Communities Speak Out for Libraries, that's the title of it, is seeking to build on the work of past ALA presidents. ALA now has available on its website a wealth of resources supporting advocacy efforts. The initiative that we're working on now is really working on developing tools for how to engage with our communities, including assisting with how to engage with the many diverse elements within our communities, and how to really listen for what communities' assets, strengths, and aspirations are. Then together we want to define a clear and unified message about the value of libraries to that community, using research results where we can. So if what really matters to a community is that young children enter school ready to read, we have studies that provide the data about how libraries have a significant impact on literacy development in very young children. The research results may be important in how we craft our messages. Next, I think we want to develop the tools then for helping libraries find really influential people in the community to help deliver those messages. This is especially powerful when the messages come from unexpected allies who are library advocates. The example that I like to use for this is that Los Angeles City just had a measure on the ballot in the last year to raise the minimum level of support for the library there. They have a law in California that you can have a certain amount set aside for library funding, and it's the minimum amount, and they were trying to raise the minimum amount. One of the spokespersons, one of the people who really endorsed this measure, was the chief of police in Los Angeles. That's not a voice that you expect to usually be out there advocating for libraries, but it's an example of the power of somebody delivering a message who's not the normal person delivering the message. By truly engaging, I think we can identify who those groups and individuals who have the greatest potential to influence our decision makers. We expect to have the tools in place by the end of June for this advocacy effort. We are really continuing to gather key parts of the initiative, so please stay tuned. And I'll let you in on a little secret if you don't know it already. ALA's resources, such as Advocacy University that has many of these resources already available, you can find at ALA's website, which is at www.ala.org, and they are openly available. You do not have to be a member of ALA in order to get access to those tools. There's also a public website called ilovelibraries.org that is just for the public, and it is just checked on it today to find out how many hits it has. 9,000 hits a day. It's a real way we can get some powerful messages out to people who are interested in libraries all across the country. But again, I think it really comes back down to the local level and how you apply it at the local level. I am inspired all the time by stories from libraries of all types and by the enormous dedication and creativity of libraries and library workers and leaders and community supporters all across the country. I believe we really do make a difference, a transformational difference in people's lives, and we really do belong in that essential category of services now more than ever. We really do have a bright future, even though it may be hard to see that now. I'd like to close with a favorite quotation of mine from Margaret Mead. I'm sure many of you know it, but it has inspired me many times in my life, and it does so especially in tough times. Quote, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." Thank you very much for being here this evening.